Taking photographs that have color shifts or odd color casts usually has to do with having the wrong white balance. Most cases, you can correct it by setting your camera to auto white balance. If you're a more advanced user, you can set the white balance to the appropriate lighting situation. For instance, have you ever noticed that most indoor lights have a more orange or yellowish tone? Well, setting your camera to the tungsten setting will insert more blue into the equation to help you balance those warmer tones and thus making your whites look whiter. Red eyes used to be a much bigger problem than they are today. And if you still get red eyes in your shots from time to time, you can easily correct that using software. But it's also important to know how to keep it from happening in the first place. If your camera has a pre-flash, that will help your subject's eyes constrict down, making those irises much smaller and preventing as much light from hitting the back of the retina and causing those red eyes. Another tip is just to have your subject not look directly at the flash while you're taking your shot. Also, try to avoid using any built-in flash. Most times, it's located just way too close to the lens, and it makes it way more likely that your friends are going to end up looking like demons. Generally, when you're shooting photographs, you want to engage your audience. But too many times I notice new photographers that think that just by getting little Timmy in the shot is good enough. But if you leave too much dead space around your subject, it's not always a great idea. Next time, try using a telephoto lens and zoom in on your subject, or you can crop your photo afterwards in your photo editing program. But just remember that if you do plan to crop your photograph, always shoot at the camera's highest resolution because cropping always reduces the quality. Contrast is the difference between the highlights and the shadows. You're probably going to notice this the most on extremely sunny days. You can easily avoid an overly contrasty photo by filling in your shadows just a little bit. You can use a bounce card or a reflector to redirect some of that light into the shadows and brightening them up. You can also use flashes or speedlights if you happen to own some. When you're taking shots, try to avoid too many distractions. Having your subject with too much crap going on around them makes it extremely hard for your viewers to know what they need to be focusing on. Shooting with a bigger aperture can really help isolate your subject and blur out things in the frame that just aren't all that important. Are your shots always blurry? Then there is a really good chance that your settings aren't correct and the sensor inside your camera isn't getting enough light. One of the easiest fixes is to either use a tripod or a monopod to help stabilize your camera. Also, increasing your ISO or shutter speed will make sure that you freeze that action. Shooting in bad lighting situations or zooming in digitally might cause your camera to pixelate or smudge your images due to built-in software that basically tries to compensate for the lack of light or a better optical focal range. Try to avoid using any type of artificial zoom or in-camera fake focal range. They are going to severely degrade the quality of your images. If you try shooting pictures in situations where it's either too bright or too dark, and you've done all you can to try to retain as much detail as possible, there might be at least one last thing that you can try: exposure compensation. Basically, compensating for the exposure either boosts or reduces the exposure of the subject by 1/3 to 3 stops of light to help you regain the detail that you might have otherwise lost. Also, try spot metering only your subject and see if that helps. While it's great having a camera with high ISO, you can easily overdo it and make your photos look terrible. So when you're shooting in low light conditions, the higher you push your ISO, the more noise you're going to introduce into your photographs. Absolutely do not confuse this with film grain. ISO is artificial and it looks horrible. Instead, use a tripod to reduce handshake or a flash to increase the amount of light that you have available to you. Too many times, young photographers are just scared to death to make mistakes. Learn as much as you can. Go out and try new things. Experiment with your gear. You're only going to get better the more you shoot. And for those of you professional photographers out there, I find that they end up using or getting into a routine and they just play it safe. They use the same gear, they go to the same locations, and they never change it up. Break those habits and try something new. Try something different. You guys need to experiment just as much as the new guys do.